What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Unknown Coatings channel. This is the #1 instructional channel for powder coating here on YouTube. Today, we're doing some brakes that are a super common upgrade in the Honda world. These calipers originally came off of the Acura RL. This is the Advix variants, which were available from '05 to '06, and I believe the 2007 to 2012 were Brembos. But the work here is all the same. The calipers are actually identical. These are a junkyard find, and I often keep cores of these to do for customers who want to eliminate downtimes. Definitely something I suggest for other powder coaters who want to do this kind of as a career. So let's get into it. The first step here is going to be disassembling the brakes. Because these were sourced at a wrecking yard, they actually still had the pins and pads and everything in them. There is a single pin that holds in two larger pad pins and a tension plate. Once those are removed, you can then use the proper bit on an impact. So I prefer an impact to remove the assembly bolts. These will not be reused for this job, but if you do a lot of calipers, I definitely suggest keeping them because they're a specialty bolt and it's always good to have replacements. With the two halves separated, remove the two O-ring gaskets. Next, remove the bleeder valves. These are often stuck, and you can see my kind of archaic technique for removing them. I always suggest using a line wrench to help ensure that you don't strip the heads of these. These are also going to be being replaced in this build, so I'm just going to be tossing these. And guys, just a quick reminder, if you guys like powder coating or powder coating content, be sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, leave a comment, do all those cool things that will get us back into the YouTube algorithm, or at least help us within the YouTube algorithm. Helps the channel out a ton, and I always appreciate it. Next up, we need to remove the dust boots. Now, you can do this with a pick typically, but a flathead screwdriver works better for these as they're not the typical just rubber ring that sits on the edges of pistons. These actually have a thin sheet metal ring inside them. I'm not exactly sure what it's there for. I'll show you those a little bit later on in the assembly process. I won't rebuild calipers with used seals for a number of reasons, the main one being safety. So these can be discarded as a whole, but I always suggest ordering your caliper rebuild kits and verifying they're a match before tossing your pieces. Because trying to rebuild calipers with the wrong parts sucks. Guys, I have to interrupt this video real quick. I just realized I somehow didn't record video of me removing the pistons.
What an idiot.
I have other brake tutorials on my channel that can show you the way specifically for these ones. You can just carefully pry them out with a flathead screwdriver along the groove on the piston. Another option is, of course, to use a tool to pull these pistons, but honestly, those tools are trash most of the time. So my other go-to method is just compressed air and blowing the piston like into a towel. Once again, you can find these other techniques on my other videos in this channel. Just click on my channel. There's lots of brake tutorials there. Once the pistons are removed, I suggest using a pick like this available at Harbor Freight. You can just use these to carefully pop out the caliper piston seals, and then once those are out, they're going to be discarded as well, as the rebuild kits will of course come with these. Then you're going to be hosing down this thing. Make sure you get all the brake fluid off. You can also, if you use chemical stripper, throw it in there to clean these just the same. Once these are all cleaned up, we need to mask them for media blasting. I use this blue duct tape from 3M. It seems to work great for blasting since it cuts really well and it removes cleanly every time, which I can't say for all duct tape in general. When doing brake calipers, I have a specific way that I like to do the masking, but I always consult with the customer to make sure that we're on the same page and masking these calipers or whatever the job might be to meet both of our expectations. I, of course, mask the mating surfaces of the two halves as well as anywhere you're going to be using something like a crush washer, which is where the line comes into the back of these brake calipers. I tend to use cheap Amazon X-Acto blades, but I also replace them really consistently to make sure that I have a nice clean edge on my tape. The piston area, of course, will get silicone plugs during the blasting process. I don't use the same plugs for blasting as I do for coating, as the blasting tends to damage the plugs a bit, and I don't want to risk media being embedded in the plugs, which can fall out into the powder throughout the process. But if you're at the point that you're doing brake calipers, you probably are pretty competent at masking. Once these are done, they're going to be going into the blast cabinet. This is during like a month period where I was trying a different blast media. I, of course, normally use 3060 green diamond. This was like a 80 mesh red garnet, like Australian red garnet, that I did not love. Broke down really fast and it cut kind of weird compared to the 3060. Now, that could be because it's 80 mesh. Just in general, I didn't like it. It's also significantly more expensive, of course, than green diamond. Now that these are all blasted, we need to remove the masking materials, in this case, just the tape and plugs. I typically will take it a step further and will throw these into my ultrasonic cleaner. This is probably overkill for most people, but I have this weird fear of blasting material somehow being inside the calipers when done, and I'm never really confident that just rinsing them with hot water and blowing them off is is going to be enough. Since I'm going to be keeping the Acura logo of bare aluminum, I wanted to go over these and give them a good brushing to make them pop a little bit. I do that by first sanding the logo, usually ending with 400 grit paper. Gives them a nice shine to start with. Then to create the brushed look, I use an 80 grit paper on a block of wood and cut the grain directionally across the logo. Once the lines are clearly visible, you just end up using a Scotch-Brite pad to create that kind of satin appearance on the metal. And all of this should be done before your outgassing process. After outgassing, we're going to need to mask these for powder coating. This process is similar to masking for media blasting, but using different materials. I prefer amber tape for most jobs. The trade name for this, I believe, is Kapton, but that's just DuPont's name for it. They're the originators. You can find it under that name or just amber high temp tape most places like Amazon. It's more expensive than traditional green high temp tape, but I think it works better for nearly every aspect of powder coating, so I always suggest it. Then we're going to be moving on to the masking of the piston bores. I'm using my roll of high temp masking that I can set up and run through my plotter. You just have to take a quick measurement of the circle or whatever shape you want to cut out and set up your file accordingly. It makes this masking significantly faster and easier for me, and it looks a lot better and cleaner most of the time. I also mask the little pads where the brake pad guide plates sit on. This protects that surface from powder as well as blocking the threaded hole that keeps the pad guide plates in place. The masking is, of course, finished by covering the brake line inlet on the backside of this caliper because these tend to use crush washers, and you don't want to be crushing crush washers against powder coating. With these now hung up in the booth, it's time to spray. I believe the color on these was Zuki Yellow from Prismatic. I know some of you guys asked me for gun setting info, which I will try to provide in future videos, but this video was actually recorded a good while back, so my apologies. It's not going to be in this video. Now, many of you probably noticed I took time to brush the letters but didn't actually mask them, and that's because they are a nice raised letter, so very easy to wipe off and remove the powder before curing. Doing this process is a little bit tedious, and I admit trying to make it work while the part's hanging is a bit of a nightmare. I always suggest holding the hook so you can put a decent amount of pressure on the part as you wipe the powder off. These will, of course, go back into the oven for a simple flow out. There are tools, of course, that you can use to do stuff like this. You don't really need them. I've seen guys use squeegees, like silicone squeegees, to wipe the stuff off. I've even seen people use really fine vacuum tips to vacuum the stuff off. But when the letters are defined like this and have a nice sharp edge and they're high enough up off the part to be able to wipe the powder, this is definitely the best way to go about it. So after the brakes go into the oven for the flow out of the yellow, come back out, and once the temperature drops below 150 degrees, I'm going to go ahead and throw Tiger's Bango Clear on the top of these. This will give them a lot glossier finish, as you can see here. It also seals in the aluminum and makes it look a lot better on top of that. Now for reassembly, once again, I only use new parts. The first thing you got to do is put these little rings in, these little O-rings that are basically what the pistons go against and seal fluid from coming out. I'm using brake assembly lube. I'll get more into that. I have another brake video coming up and why I switched to this over just using brake fluid like I was using before. But you just lube up the piston, lube up the ring, and then shove these into place. Just make sure you get them straight when you go in. You don't want to twist the O-ring at all when you put those in. Then the little metal pieces I was mentioning before have to get popped into place on these. These are not on most brake caliper jobs, so is kind of specific to these. I don't think I've ever seen them on any other job. And then it's just a matter of shoving the dust boots down over top of those. It's actually pretty easy once those metal things are in place. They're kind of like a guide for the dust boots. They fit perfect. Then these are the little plate things that I was talking about that help guide the brake pads. They're called brake pad guide plates. I'm replacing the hardware. These are a stainless Allen head bolt that I'm putting in. They come with Allen head bolts, but most of the time you have to cut them out or drill them out. I usually just take a grinder, cut a notch into it, and then use a flathead screwdriver after I heat up the bolt quite a bit. Use a flathead screwdriver and you can get them out. I put stainless ones in, no Loctite, none of that stuff. These tend to stay in place very well, trust me. After that, you go ahead and put the new O-rings in. They just pop into place here. Got to make sure that you pay attention, make sure these don't fall out. You can actually put a little tiny drop of brake fluid will hold these in place really well. So even if you're manipulating it around a little bit, they'll stay in place. Go ahead and drop the halves together and then put a bolt in. I'm actually using the old bolts in this just to make sure everything lines up. I put the two outside bolts in, and then I'm going to put new bolts on the center and then pull these out and put the other ones in. I'm only doing this because I'm not using original bolts. Just wanted to make sure that this all lined up perfectly before I got everything together. And here you can see the brakes completed. This was stainless bolts, stainless washers, all new pins, basically any piece of hardware that I could replace. I couldn't find new little guide plates at all, but these came out absolutely amazing. Customer was in love with them. This is just a pair. These only come as fronts. Just a thing to keep in mind. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.